The night before we buried my husband, my twin sister Emma stood in my doorway, swaying slightly with a bottle of Merlot in her hand, ready to deliver what she thought would be the final blow to my already shattered heart. She had no idea that our entire family was gathered in the shadows behind her, about to witness the confession that would change everything. Looking back now, I realize that moment was both an ending and a beginning, though at the time all I could feel was the weight of 28 years of betrayal crushing down on me like an avalanche. Emma and I came into this world together on a cold February morning in Denver, Colorado. Identical in every physical way, but worlds apart in spirit. Our mother used to joke that I got all the kindness genes while Emma got all the ambition. But what she didn't realize was that Emma's ambition was specifically focused on destroying everything good that came my way. I just didn't know it yet. Growing up, I thought I was simply unlucky, that fate had decided I would be the sister who struggled while Emma sailed through life with ease. Every stumble I made, every opportunity that slipped through my fingers, every relationship that inexplicably fell apart, I blamed myself, or the universe, never suspecting that my own twin was orchestrating my failures from behind the scenes. The text I received from Emma 3 weeks before that fateful night was typical of her style. She'd somehow found out I was pregnant despite my careful efforts to keep it quiet until I was further along. The message was short and cutting, asking if I was stress-eating again because I looked bigger in the photos Mum had posted from my birthday dinner. She didn't know those extra pounds were from the life growing inside me. The last gift my husband Daniel had given me before deploying overseas for what would be his final mission. I hadn't told anyone except Daniel's mother, Sarah, because I wanted to wait until the second trimester, until I felt safer about the pregnancy. But Emma had always had a sixth sense for finding my vulnerabilities at exactly the moment when I was most fragile. The night she showed up at my door, I was sitting in my living room surrounded by sympathy cards and funeral arrangements, trying to write a eulogy for a man who should have had decades more to live. Sarah had just left after helping me choose the music for the service, both of us crying over Daniel's favorite songs. I was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness, the kind of bone-deep weariness that comes from grief so profound it changes your DNA. When the doorbell rang at nearly 11 o'clock, I almost didn't answer it. But something, maybe instinct or maybe just habit, made me get up and check the peephole. There stood Emma, designer dress slightly askew, clutching that wine bottle like a weapon. The moment I opened the door, she pushed past me without waiting for an invitation. Her perfume, the same expensive scent she'd worn since college, filled my small entryway with memories of every time she'd swept into my life to deliver bad news with a smile. This time, though, there was something different in her eyes, a wildness I'd never seen before, like she was done pretending to be the caring sister. She looked me up and down with that familiar critical gaze and delivered her opening salvo about stress eating, about how my black dress was straining at the seams. The cruelty of commenting on my appearance the night before my husband's funeral should have shocked me, but Emma had trained me well over the years to expect nothing less. I kept my face neutral as she spoke, a skill I'd perfected through decades of her casual cruelty. Inside, my stomach churned and the baby fluttered as if even she could sense the danger in the room. But something made me stay calm, some deep instinct that told me this night was different, that Emma was about to reveal something important. So instead of crying or asking her to leave, I played the role she expected, the broken little sister who needed to be kicked while she was down. I responded softly, almost meekly, telling her that despite all the bad luck in my life, I'd still ended up happier than her. It was a calculated risk, a small needle designed to pierce her ego just enough to make her careless. The effect was immediate. Emma's eye twitched, a tell she'd had since we were children that meant I'd hit a nerve. She took a long pull from her wine bottle, not even bothering with the pretense of asking for a glass, and her smile turned predatory. That's when she said the words that would echo in my mind forever. That I still didn't get it. That I thought all my bad luck was the universe when really it had been her all along. The confession poured out of her like poison from a wound, each revelation more devastating than the last. She started with Marcus, my high school boyfriend who had ghosted me senior year without explanation. I'd been devastated, convinced I'd done something wrong, spending months analysing every conversation and gesture trying to understand what had driven him away. Emma's voice was gleeful as she explained how she'd seduced him while wearing my perfume, how she'd convinced him I was cheating with his best friend, how she'd made sure he'd never trust either of us again. I made myself appear shocked, whispering that it was impossible, reminding her she'd been at our mother's house that weekend, helping with Mum's gallbladder surgery. The lie came so easily to her lips as she laughed at my naivety, mocking me for being slow to catch on. The cruelty in her voice as she detailed how she'd planned it all, how she'd known exactly when I'd be at my volunteer shift at the hospital, how she'd used the spare key I'd given her for emergencies to let herself into my apartment and into my bed with my boyfriend. Every word was another knife, but I kept my face carefully arranged in an expression of dawning horror rather than the cold fury that was building inside me. Then she moved on to the baby I'd lost at 16 weeks, 5 years into my marriage with Daniel. The miscarriage that had nearly broken me, that had sent me into therapy for the first time in my life. Emma's eyes sparkled with sick pride as she told me about the special smoothie she'd made me the morning before I started bleeding. How she'd researched exactly what herbs and supplements could trigger a miscarriage. How she'd crushed them up and mixed them into my favourite berry blend. I gripped the back of my couch so hard my knuckles went white. And this time I didn't have to fake the tremor in my voice when I asked her how she could do something so evil. She just laughed and said it was easy when you were smarter than everyone else, when you could play the perfect daughter so well that no one suspected a thing. The litany of sabotage continued, each confession building on the last. The job at the marketing firm I'd lost after someone called in pretending to be me and quit without notice. The friends who'd suddenly stopped talking to me after someone who looked exactly like me spread vicious rumours at parties I hadn't attended. The apartment fire that had destroyed everything I owned that the investigators said was caused by a candle I swore I hadn't lit. Even my wedding dress, which had arrived torn and stained the day before the ceremony, forcing me to wear a backup dress I'd bought in a panic. Every piece of bad luck I'd experienced over nearly 3 decades had been carefully orchestrated by the person who shared my DNA, who knew me better than anyone else in the world, who had used that knowledge to systematically destroy every good thing in my life. But nothing prepared me for the final confession, the one that broke through my careful performance and brought real tears to my eyes. Emma leaned in close, her wine-soured breath hot on my face, and told me about Daniel's last phone call from Afghanistan. He'd tried to reach me, but Emma had answered my phone while I was in the shower. Instead of coming to get me, she'd told him I was out with someone else, that I'd been seeing other men while he was deployed, that I'd moved on and didn't want to talk to him anymore. She'd listened to his confusion and hurt, had heard him beg to speak to me one more time, and had coldly told him I was too busy with my new life to care about his phone calls. Then she'd deleted the call from my phone history and gone home, leaving me to wonder why Daniel hadn't called that week like he'd promised. He'd died in an IED explosion 3 hours later, believing I'd abandoned him, that the woman he'd loved enough to marry had betrayed him while he was fighting for his country. The world stopped spinning as those words sank in. Everything else she'd done, all the sabotage and cruelty over the years, paled in comparison to this final act of evil. My husband had died thinking I didn't love him, had spent his last hours on earth believing a lie told by my own sister out of nothing but spite and jealousy. The tears that rolled down my cheeks were real now, but so was the cold clarity that settled over me like armor. I stood up slowly, mechanically, and walked to my front door. Emma called after me, laughing, asking if I was running away like I always did, if I couldn't handle the truth. She had no idea what truth was about to be revealed. I pulled open the door and the porch light illuminated them all. My parents stood frozen on the top step, my mother clutching my father's arms so tight her knuckles were white. Behind them, Sarah's face was a mask of grief and rage, while Daniel's army buddy Jake stood with clenched fists like he was physically restraining himself from charging into the house. My brother-in-law Tom was there too, his arm protectively around their 7-year-old son Lucas, whose wide eyes were filled with confusion and fear. The wine bottle slipped from Emma's fingers and shattered on my hardwood floor, red wine spreading like blood across the boards. The silence stretched out, heavy and suffocating, until our father spoke in a voice I'd never heard before. Calm, cold, and absolutely lethal. He announced that they would be filing fraud charges in the morning for the house Emma had convinced them to put in her name. The house that should have been mine, but that she'd stolen by telling them I was addicted to prescription drugs after Daniel's death. Mum found her voice then, shaky but clear, revealing that she'd been sending Emma $2,000 a month for 5 years, thinking it was going to me to help with my recovery. Every birthday card with a check, every concerned phone call about my finances, all of it had been based on Emma's lies about my supposed addiction and instability. But it was Lucas who delivered the blow that finally cracked Emma's composure. Her own son, the quiet boy who usually hid behind his father's legs at family gatherings, stepped forward and asked why she'd said those mean things about Aunt Katie. His voice was small but steady as he told the grandmother he barely saw anymore that he wanted to live with his daddy, that he didn't feel safe with Mummy anymore. I watched Emma's face cycle through emotions I'd never seen her display before. The mask she'd worn for 28 years was finally cracking, and what showed underneath wasn't pretty. Tom silently removed his wedding ring and let it fall onto my doorstep, the small metallic sound somehow louder than Emma's shattering wine bottle had been. He announced that his lawyer would handle the custody arrangements and that Emma shouldn't come to their house. The finality in his voice spoke of a decision that had been building for years, of suspicions confirmed and last straws finally broken. Sarah found her voice then, each word precise and cutting as she told Emma she was dead to them, that she'd stolen their son's last moments of believing he was loved, that she'd poisoned what should have been a comfort in his final hours. Jake, who'd been Daniel's closest friend in their unit, who'd been with him when the IED exploded, finally spoke up. His voice was rough with controlled emotion as he revealed that Daniel had called out for me as he was dying, that my name had been the last word on his lips. The weight of that truth contrasted against Emma's lie hung in the air between us all. My sister stood there in the spreading puddle of wine, swaying slightly, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. That's when she bent down and picked up a large shard of the broken wine bottle, its edges glinting in the porch light like a blade. She looked directly at me, and for the first time in our lives I saw her clearly. Not the golden child our parents had favoured, not the successful sister who always had everything together, but a broken, twisted person who had spent her entire life feeding off my pain. Her voice was different when she spoke, empty of the false cheer and cutting wit I'd known for so long. She said if she couldn't have a life, then neither could I, and took a step toward me with the glass raised. Jake moved faster than I would have thought possible for such a large man. His hand shot out and caught Emma's wrist mid-swing, twisting hard enough that she cried out and dropped the makeshift weapon. It shattered further on impact, creating a minefield of glass shards across my entryway. Dad already had his phone out, his voice steady as he told the emergency operator we needed police immediately, that someone was attempting to assault his pregnant daughter with a weapon. Mom pushed past Jake and positioned herself between Emma and me, her whole body trembling, but her stance firm, finally choosing to protect the right daughter. My hand went instinctively to my belly, shielding the baby who didn't deserve to be born into such chaos. Emma kept struggling against Jake's grip, screaming words that made no sense, her face twisted with rage and something else that looked almost like grief. The broken glass crunched under everyone's feet as they moved, the sound sharp and final like the breaking of family bonds. Lucas was crying now, hiding his face against his father's hip, and the sound of his fear finally seemed to penetrate Emma's rage. The police arrived within minutes, their lights painting my quiet suburban street in alternating red and blue. Two patrol cars pulled up and officers emerged quickly, taking in the scene with practiced eyes. The senior officer, a grey-haired man with kind eyes, went straight to Jake and Emma, while his partner, a younger woman with her hair pulled back in a tight bun, approached Mum and me. She asked if I was injured, and I shook my head, though my voice came out as barely a whisper when I tried to speak. The male officer was talking to Jake in low tones, professionally taking over the restraint of my sister. Emma had gone limp now, all the fight drained out of her, though tears still streamed down her face. The female officer guided Mum and me inside, away from the chaos and broken glass. She had the kind of calm presence that made you feel safe, even when your world was falling apart. Once inside, she brought me water from my own kitchen without asking where things were. A small kindness that nearly broke my composure completely. We sat at my dining table, the same table where Emma and I had shared birthday cakes as children, where we'd done homework side by side, where I'd never suspected the person across from me was planning my destruction. The officer took out a small notebook and asked me to tell her what had happened, starting from the beginning. My voice felt disconnected from my body as I recounted Emma's arrival, her confession, the threat with the glass. Mum stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, looking older than I'd ever seen her. When I mentioned the pregnancy, the officer's demeanour shifted slightly, becoming even more protective. She made a note and underlined something in her book. Then she asked if I had any security cameras, and the question hit me like electricity. My video doorbell had been recording the entire time. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and opened the app. The officer moved her chair next to mine to view the screen, and there it was, crystal clear with perfect audio. Emma's entire confession, from the moment I'd opened the door to her attack with the glass, all captured with timestamps. The officer's expression changed as she watched, becoming more serious with each revelation. She asked if she could use my phone to call someone, and I handed it over without question. She stepped away and spoke urgently to whoever answered, using terms like recorded confession and multiple potential charges, and need a detective immediately. When she returned, she explained that the footage was crucial evidence that could support serious criminal charges beyond just the assault with the glass. Within the hour, Detective Raymond Chen arrived, an older man with tired eyes but a sharp mind. He introduced himself and asked permission to review everything again. We sat at my table while he watched the doorbell footage, his face remaining carefully neutral even during the worst revelations. When Emma confessed to the poisoning that caused my miscarriage, his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He took detailed notes and asked clarifying questions about dates and incidents, building a timeline of decades of criminal behavior. The detective explained that the recorded confession could support charges including assault with a deadly weapon, criminal threats, identity theft, fraud, and potentially more serious charges related to the pregnancy loss, though that would be harder to prove after so much time had passed. He treated me with the kind of serious respect that made me realize this wasn't just a family dispute in the eyes of the law. This was a pattern of criminal behavior that had finally been exposed. Outside, I heard more sirens and looked through my window to see an ambulance arriving. The officers had called it for Emma, who was sitting on my lawn looking dazed and smaller than I'd ever seen her. Mum rushed outside, that instinct to protect her children overriding everything else, even after what she'd witnessed. The paramedics were checking Emma's vital signs, shining lights in her eyes, asking questions she seemed unable or unwilling to answer clearly. One of the officers explained that due to Emma's intoxication level and the threat she posed to herself and others, they were taking her for psychiatric evaluation. She would be held for at least 72 hours while doctors assessed her mental state. They were also initiating an emergency protective order that would prevent her from coming near me or contacting me in any way. The words washed over me like I was underwater, everything feeling surreal and distant. After the ambulance left with Emma, Sarah approached me carefully, as if I might shatter at any moment. She asked if she could come inside to talk, and I nodded, leading her and Jake back into my house. We sat in my living room, the same room where I'd grieved for Daniel, where I'd planned his funeral, where I'd just discovered the truth about his final hours. Sarah's hands twisted in her lap as she began to speak, apologizing for every cold word and suspicious look she'd given me after Daniel's death. She'd believed Emma's poison about me moving on, about not being there for her son's final call. The apologies poured out, mixed with tears. Two women who loved the same man finally able to grieve together without lies between us. Jake sat silent as a guardian while Sarah and I held each other and cried. He finally spoke up to tell me more about Daniel's final moments, how he'd called out for me repeatedly, how he'd wanted me to know he loved me. The truth was devastating, but also healing in a way I hadn't expected. At least now, I knew that Daniel's last thoughts were of love, not betrayal. He'd known the truth in his heart, even if Emma's lies had confused his final hours. By the time everyone left, it was nearly 3 a.m. My house felt different, like Emma's confession had exorcised ghosts I didn't even know were haunting me. I sat in my living room with one hand on my belly, feeling the baby move and kick, this little piece of Daniel that would carry on despite Emma's attempts to destroy everything connected to him. I didn't sleep that night, couldn't close my eyes without seeing Emma's face as she confessed to 28 years of deliberate cruelty. The next morning brought a parade of revelations and decisions. Detective Chen returned with a victim's advocate named Patricia Wong, a soft-spoken woman who explained my rights and options with infinite patience. She walked me through what pressing charges would mean, what the court process would look like, how long everything might take. I signed papers authorizing them to pursue every possible charge, my voice steady as I made it clear I wanted full accountability for what Emma had done. My parents arrived looking like they'd aged a decade overnight. Dad carried a folder thick with documents about the fraudulent property transfer. Bank statements showing the money they had sent to Emma thinking it was for me, and emails where she'd made false claims about my supposed drug addiction. His hands shook as he handed everything over, but his voice was firm when he said they were filing charges and would testify to everything they'd been tricked into believing. Mum couldn't meet my eyes at first, her guilt hanging between us like a physical barrier. When she finally spoke, her words came out broken by sobs. She apologized for choosing to believe Emma's lies, for not protecting me, for all the family dinners where she'd treated me like the problem child while Emma played the perfect daughter. I told them I needed time to process their apologies, that I appreciated them taking action now but couldn't instantly forgive 28 years of favoritism and blindness. The criminal case moved forward with momentum that surprised me. Emma's recorded confession was devastating evidence that made her defense attorney's job nearly impossible. The man, a tired-looking public defender named Carl Whitman, reached out through Detective Chen to propose a plea deal within 2 weeks. Emma would plead guilty to assault with a deadly weapon and identity theft in exchange for 3 years probation, mandatory mental health treatment, and maintaining all protective orders. No jail time, which disappointed me, but Patricia explained it was actually a reasonable outcome that would hold her accountable while avoiding the trauma of a trial. During this time, I had my 20-week ultrasound appointment with Dr. Buss. Patricia Martinez, the OB-GYN who had been monitoring my pregnancy carefully since the stress of recent events had caused some early contractions. As she moved the ultrasound wand across my belly, she smiled and told me I was having a girl. I burst into tears right there on the exam table, thinking about Daniel, and how he'd talked about having a daughter someday, how he'd been so sure our first child would be a girl that he'd already picked out names. Sarah was with me at the appointment, and she cried too when the doctor pointed out the baby's features on the screen. We could see her little profile, her tiny hands and feet, the strong heartbeat that thundered through the speakers. It was a moment of pure joy carved out of all the pain, a reminder that life continues even after devastating loss. I decided to name her Danielle after her father, a way to carry his memory forward into the next generation. The house that had been fraudulently transferred to Emma's name was returned to me through a court order that my parents' attorney expedited. It felt strange taking ownership of a property I should have had all along, another piece of my life Emma had stolen being returned. I decided to sell it and use the money to set up a college fund for Danielle. turning Emma's theft into something positive for my daughter's future. Tom's divorce proceedings moved quickly once the criminal charges were filed. He sought and received primary custody of Lucas, with Emma getting only supervised visitation at a family centre. The court took the recorded confessions seriously, especially the part where she'd admitted to coaching Lucas to lie about me, child psychologist Dr. Se. Marina Reeves testified that Lucas had expressed fear of his mother and specifically requested to live with his father full-time. It broke my heart that my nephew had to go through this, but I was grateful he had Tom to provide stability. As winter turned to spring, I found myself building a new life from the wreckage Emma had created. Sarah moved into my guest room temporarily to help with the pregnancy, and we formed an unlikely family unit bound by our shared love for Daniel and anticipation for Danielle's arrival. Jake visited whenever he was stateside, bringing stories about Daniel that made us laugh and cry in equal measure. He became determined to be the uncle figure that Danielle would need, someone who could tell her about her father's bravery and humour. The plea hearing happened on a grey March morning. I sat in the gallery with my parents, Sarah and Jake, as Emma stood before the judge looking diminished in her conservative suit. She read a prepared statement apologising for her actions, but even then, I could hear the subtle deflections, the way she blamed mental health issues and childhood trauma rather than taking full responsibility. The judge sentenced her according to the plea agreement, but added his own stern warning that any violation would result in immediate incarceration. I gave my victim impact statement that day, standing at a podium with my hand resting on my growing belly. I spoke about the 28 years of sabotage, about losing Daniel with a lie between us, about the baby I'd miscarried because of Emma's poisoned smoothie. But I also talked about choosing to build something positive from the destruction, about the family I was creating with Sarah and Jake and my parents, about the daughter who would grow up surrounded by love and truth, instead of manipulation and lies. The restitution hearing happened separately, where the judge ordered Emma to pay back the money she'd stolen from our parents, plus my therapy costs and legal fees. The total came to over $90,000 to be paid in monthly installments during her probation. Her attorney argued she couldn't afford it on her retail salary, but the judge was unmoved, saying the debt would follow her regardless of her current income. I knew I'd probably never see most of that money, but having it officially acknowledged felt like another form of justice. Life developed a new rhythm as I entered my third trimester. I worked part-time from home as a virtual assistant, a job I'd found through a mum's group that understood my need for flexibility. My parents came by several times a week, slowly rebuilding our relationship through small acts of service and careful conversations. Mum would bring groceries and cook meals, while Dad fixed things around the house that had been neglected during my grief spiral after Daniel's death. Tom brought Lucas over regularly, and my nephew slowly began to relax and act like a normal 7-year-old again. He was fascinated by my growing belly and asked endless questions about his baby cousin. One afternoon, he felt Danielle kick and his face lit up with wonder. He started drawing pictures for the baby and insisted on helping me set up the nursery, carefully arranging stuffed animals on the shelves with the seriousness of someone with an important job to do. 3 weeks before my due date, I went into early labour during a particularly stressful day when Emma had violated the protective order by sending me a letter through a mutual acquaintance. The letter was full of self-pity and blame, accusing me of ruining her life and turning everyone against her. I'd immediately reported it to her probation officer, but the stress triggered contractions that wouldn't stop. Sarah rushed me to the hospital while calling everyone else, her voice steady despite the fear I could see in her eyes. After 12 hours of labour, Danielle arrived on May the 15th at 4:23 in the morning, 6 pounds and 3 ounces of perfect baby girl with her father's dark hair and stubborn chin. When the nurse placed her in my arms, I sobbed so hard I could barely see her through my tears. Sarah was there, Jake had flown in from Texas, and my parents waited in the hallway. It was the family Daniel should have been part of, gathered to welcome his daughter into the world. Those first weeks with a newborn were simultaneously the hardest and most healing time of my life. Sarah essentially moved in, teaching me how to breastfeed, how to swaddle, how to function on no sleep. She told me stories about Daniel as a baby while we took turns walking the floors with a fussy Danielle at 3 in the morning. My parents came daily, and I watched them pour all the grandparent love they'd stored up into this tiny person who represented hope after so much destruction. When Danielle was 2 months old, I received word that Emma had been arrested for violating her probation after showing up drunk at our parents' house, demanding they convince me to drop the protective order. The judge revoked her probation and sentenced her to 6 months in county jail. I felt no satisfaction hearing the news, just a weary relief that there would be enforced distance between us. Tom told me Lucas had started sleeping better, knowing his mother couldn't show up unexpectedly. I returned to work part-time when Danielle was 4 months old, finding a better position as an office manager for a non-profit that supported military families. It felt right, using my organizational skills to help people who understood loss and sacrifice. My boss, herself a war widow, was understanding about the times I needed to leave early for pediatrician appointments, or when Danielle had a rough night and I showed up exhausted. On Daniel's birthday, when Danielle was 6 months old, we held a small memorial at the Veterans Cemetery. Jake had organized it, gathering some of Daniel's unit members who wanted to pay their respects and meet his daughter. Watching these tough soldiers pass Danielle around, cooing at her and telling her stories about her brave daddy, I felt Daniel's presence more strongly than I had since his death. His brothers-in-arms had become her extended family, ensuring she would grow up knowing exactly who her father was. The holidays that year were bittersweet but healing. Emma was still in jail, which meant our family could gather without the tension of managing protective orders. On Thanksgiving, I watched my parents play with Danielle, their faces soft with the kind of joy that comes after surviving great pain. Lucas helped feed her mashed sweet potatoes, giggling when she made faces at new flavors. Tom's new girlfriend, Rebecca, joined us, and I was glad to see him moving forward, building a healthier life for himself and Lucas. When Danielle spoke her first word at 10 months old, it was Nana, directed at Sarah during one of their daily playtime sessions. We all cried, even Jake, who happened to be visiting that week. It felt like Daniel's way of blessing the bond between his mother and daughter, this grandmother-granddaughter relationship that had become so central to both their lives. Sarah had found purpose in helping raise Danielle, and Danielle had a doting grandmother who kept her father's memory alive through stories and photos. Emma was released from jail just before Danielle's first birthday, immediately entering a court-mandated halfway house with strict supervision. Her probation officer contacted me to discuss safety planning, and we established clear protocols for maintaining distance. She wasn't allowed within 1,000 feet of my home, Danielle's daycare, or any location where we had scheduled activities. The protection felt necessary but sad, a permanent fracture in what had once been the closest relationship possible between two people. I threw Danielle a small first birthday party with our chosen family. The theme was butterflies, which Sarah said symbolized transformation and new beginnings. Watching my daughter smash purple frosting all over her face while everyone sang, I felt a profound sense of peace. We had survived the worst year imaginable and built something beautiful from the ashes. Daniel would have been so proud of his little girl, would have loved seeing her surrounded by people who cherished her. As spring arrived again, I started dating someone I met through the military family support group. Marcus was a widower himself, his wife having died from cancer 3 years earlier, leaving him with twin boys who are now 5. We understood each other's grief in a way that didn't require explanation, and our kids got along beautifully. Danielle adored the boys, following them around with determined toddler steps. It wasn't the life I'd planned with Daniel, but it was a good life, built on honesty and shared understanding. The second anniversary of Daniel's death arrived with less sharp pain than the first. We gathered at his grave, a larger group now including Marcus and his boys, who laid flowers they'd picked from their garden. Danielle toddled around the headstone, patting it gently like she understood this stone was connected to the father in all her pictures. Jake read a letter from Daniel's commanding officer about the Medal of Valor he'd been awarded posthumously, and Sarah presented it to Danielle to keep for when she was older. That summer, I received a letter from Emma through her attorney. She was requesting permission to send a birthday gift, For Danielle's second birthday. I discussed it with my therapist, with Sarah, with my parents. In the end, I decided to maintain the boundary. Danielle didn't know Emma existed, and I wanted to keep it that way until she was old enough to understand the complex history. Maybe someday, when Danielle was much older, I would tell her about her aunt. But for now, protecting her innocence was my priority. Tom and Rebecca got married in a small ceremony that fall, with Lucas as the ring bearer and Danielle as the flower girl. Watching my nephew beam with happiness as his dad married a woman who truly loved them both, I felt hopeful about breaking cycles. Lucas was in therapy, working through the trauma of his early years, but he was thriving in school and sports. He'd asked me recently if Danielle could be his real cousin, even though his mum was in timeout, and I'd assured him that family was about love, not just blood. As I write this now, Danielle is 3 years old, a chatty, confident little girl who knows she is deeply loved. She talks to Daniel's picture every night before bed, telling him about her day in the matter-of-fact way only toddlers can manage. She knows Daddy is in heaven, but that he loves her bigger than the sky, as she likes to say. Marcus and I are engaged now, planning a small wedding for next spring. His boys have started calling me Mum, and Danielle calls him Daddy Marcus, understanding somehow that she can have both her angel daddy and her earth daddy. My relationship with my parents has found a new equilibrium. They're wonderful grandparents to Danielle, present and loving in a way they never quite managed when Emma and I were young. We've had many therapy sessions together, unpacking the dynamics that allowed Emma's behavior to flourish unchecked for so long. They've taken accountability for their role while I've worked on forgiving them. It's an ongoing process, but we're committed to doing better for the next generation. Emma remains at the edges of our family, maintaining her distance as required by law. I hear updates occasionally through the family grapevine. She's working as a bookkeeper, living in a small apartment across town, still in therapy. My parents see her monthly in controlled settings, but they're careful never to pressure me about reconciliation. I've made peace with the possibility that we may never have a relationship again. Some betrayals cut too deep, create chasms too wide to bridge. Sometimes I dream about the life I might have had if Emma hadn't systematically destroyed every opportunity, if she hadn't poisoned relationships and sabotaged my chances. But then I look at the life I've built from the rubble, at my daughter's laughing face, at the chosen family that surrounds us with love, and I realize I wouldn't change where I've ended up. The journey was brutal, the losses devastating, but the phoenix that rose from those ashes is stronger than the girl who never knew she was under attack. The truth Emma revealed that night before Daniel's funeral set me free in ways I'm still discovering. For 28 years, I believed I was unlucky, incompetent, unworthy of good things sticking around. Now I know that I survived a targeted campaign of destruction and still managed to build a life filled with love and purpose. Every success feels sweeter because I know it's real, earned despite someone's best efforts to steal it from me. Every relationship is deeper because it's based on truth rather than manipulation. I think about Lucas often, hoping the therapy helps him process not just what his mother did, but who she is beneath the mask. He's 11 now, starting middle school, still choosing to live with Tom and Rebecca. He's protective of Danielle in the sweetest way, teaching her soccer moves and reading her bedtime stories. When people comment on what a good big cousin he is, he beams with pride. He's broken the cycle, choosing kindness despite what he witnessed, and that gives me hope for all our futures. The financial restitution stopped when Emma went to jail and never resumed. I've accepted that I'll never see most of the money she owes, but the college fund I started for Danielle has grown through my own contributions and gifts from grandparents. Daniel's veteran benefits provide some support, and I've become savvy about managing money in a way I never was when I believed I was just bad at life. Every dollar saved feels like a victory over the narrative Emma tried to write for me. Last month, Danielle asked me why she doesn't have an Aunt Emma like her friend has an Aunt Jessica. It was the first time she'd noticed the gap in our family structure. I told her simply that sometimes grown-ups make choices that mean they can't be around children, but that she has so many people who love her that our family is complete. She accepted this with the easy adaptability of childhood. more interested in when Uncle Jake would visit again than in pursuing questions about missing relatives. I've started writing down the true stories of Daniel for Danielle, creating a book she can read when she's older. Not just the hero stories that Jake and the others tell, but the everyday memories that make a person real. How he always sang off-key in the shower. How he couldn't cook anything except perfect grilled cheese sandwiches. How he used to practice his daddy voice on my belly when I was pregnant, making up silly songs about diaper changes and bedtime stories. These small truths feel like gifts I can give her, pieces of the father she'll never meet but will always know. The house is quiet now as I finish writing this story. Danielle is asleep upstairs, star nightlight casting soft shadows on her wall. Marcus is reading in bed, giving me space to process these memories on what would have been Daniel's 35th birthday. Tomorrow will be busy with preschool drop-off and work meetings and all the beautiful chaos of regular life. But tonight, I'm sitting with the weight of how far we've come, grateful for the journey, even as I mourn what was lost along the way. If you're reading this because you've discovered your own Emma, your own hidden saboteur disguised as family or friend, know that the revelation, as devastating as it feels, is actually the beginning of freedom. The truth, even when it reshapes everything you thought you knew about your life, gives you the power to build something real. The grief of discovering betrayal is real and deserves to be honored. But so does the strength it takes to rebuild, to trust again, to choose love despite having every reason to close your heart forever. My story isn't unique in its themes, though the details might be extreme. How many of us have people in our lives who smile while undermining us, who claim love while sowing destruction? How many blame themselves for failures that were actually sabotage? How many internalize messages of unworthiness planted by those who benefit from our self-doubt? The specific weapons might differ, but the wounds are universal. So is the capacity to heal, to grow, to build something better from the wreckage. These days, I define family not by blood, but by loyalty. Not by obligation, but by choice. The people who stood on my porch that terrible night, who witnessed the truth and chose to protect me, they're my real family. The ones who show up without being asked, who love Danielle like their own, who honor Daniel's memory by living with integrity. They're the constellation I navigate by now. Blood made Emma my sister, but her choices made her a stranger. Love and commitment made Sarah my mother in all the ways that matter. I end this story where I began it, on a night when truth crashed into lies and changed everything. But now, instead of seeing it as an ending, I recognize it as the moment my real life began, the life where I know that my failures weren't all my fault, where my successes are genuinely mine, where love is given freely without manipulation. Danielle will grow up in this truth-filled life surrounded by people who chose to be there, protected by boundaries I was brave enough to set. And maybe that's the greatest victory of all, that despite everything Emma tried to steal, she couldn't touch the future I'm building for my daughter. Sometimes, in the quiet moments when Danielle is playing independently and I'm folding laundry or preparing dinner, my mind wanders to parallel universes. What would life have been like if Emma had been the sister I thought she was? Would Danielle still be alive if she hadn't developed this pathological need to destroy me? These what-ifs used to torture me, especially in those first months after learning the truth. Now they're more like passing clouds, acknowledged but not allowed to block the sun for long. I've learned through therapy that Emma's behavior likely stems from something broken deep inside her. Some fundamental inability to feel secure in her own worth unless she was diminishing mine. Dr. Pound, Anne Walters, the therapist who's guided me through this journey, helped me understand that Emma's cruelty wasn't really about me at all. I was just the closest target, the easiest person to measure herself against, the twin who reminded her that she could have chosen differently. This doesn't excuse her what she did, but it helps me release the burden of wondering what I did to deserve such treatment. The answer is nothing. I did nothing to deserve it. The ripple effects of that night continue even now. Last week, I ran into Marcus Chen, my high school boyfriend, at a coffee shop. He's married now with 3 kids, working as an architect like he always dreamed. We talked for almost an hour about those lost years, about how Emma's lies had shaped both our lives in different ways. He told me he'd spent years with trust issues, unable to fully believe any partner because of how convincing Emma had been in her deception. Another casualty of her campaign, another life touched by her poison. Marcus asked if I ever regretted not knowing the truth sooner, if I wished I'd discovered Emma's sabotage in time to prevent some of the losses. I told him honestly that while part of me grieves for the years lost and opportunities stolen, I can't regret the path that led me to Danielle. Every terrible thing Emma did ultimately brought me to Daniel, to Sarah, to the family I have now. If I'd known earlier, if I'd cut Emma off in college or high school, would I have met Daniel? Would Danielle exist? The butterfly effect of truth versus lies is impossible to untangle. I've started speaking at support groups for people who've experienced family betrayal and intimate partner deception. My story, as extreme as it is, resonates with others who've discovered that someone close to them has been deliberately undermining their lives. There's a unique grief that comes with this kind of betrayal, different from death or abandonment. It's the grief of realizing the relationship you thought you had never existed, that you've been loving an illusion while the real person worked against you in shadows. One woman in the group discovered her mother had been sabotaging her relationships for decades, wanting to keep her single and dependent. Another found out her best friend from childhood had been spreading lies about her to every employer she'd worked for, motivated by jealousy over a promotion 20 years ago. These stories remind me that Emma's pathology, while extreme, isn't unique. There are people walking among us who find satisfaction in others' destruction, who build their sense of self on the rubble of lives they've helped demolish. The practical aftermath of Emma's crimes continues to unspool in unexpected ways. Last month, I received a call from a law firm in Seattle. They were representing a company where Emma had worked briefly 5 years ago, and they'd discovered she'd been embezzling funds using a complex scheme involving identity theft, including using my social security number to open accounts. The investigation was triggered by the criminal charges from our case, which had flagged her in various databases. Now I'm working with federal investigators to untangle yet another web of Emma's deceptions, this one potentially adding federal charges to her record. Sarah and I have developed a rhythm of shared parenting that would make Daniel proud. She picks Danielle up from preschool 3 days a week, and they have special Nana Days, filled with baking projects and trips to the Children's Museum. Through Danielle, Sarah has found a way to mother Daniel again, to pour all that interrupted love into his daughter. And I've gained not just a co-parent, but the mother I always needed. One who sees me clearly and chooses me deliberately. The complexities of blended family life with Marcus bring their own challenges and joys. His boys, Ryan and Ethan, had to adjust to sharing their dad after having him to themselves since their mother died. There were months of careful navigation, family therapy sessions, and more than a few meltdowns from all 3 kids. But we've found our rhythm now. Sunday pancake breakfasts where everyone gets to choose a mix-in. Movie nights where we rotate who picks. The boys teaching Danielle how to ride a bike while she teaches them the elaborate songs Sarah makes up. It's messy and loud and imperfect and real. Marcus understands the weight of living with someone else's ghost. His late wife Rebecca was his high school sweetheart, his first and only love until cancer took her. We've had long conversations about how to honor our late spouses while building something new together. There's no jealousy or competition with the dead in our house, just acknowledgement that we're both living our second chapters, that our children are growing up with the legacy of love from parents they'll never meet. We keep photos of Daniel and Rebecca displayed prominently, tell stories about them freely, celebrate their birthdays with special traditions. Emma tried to reach out again recently, this time through a cousin who thought enough time had passed for reconciliation. The message was classic Emma, taking credit for my strength, claiming that her betrayal had actually made me stronger, that I should thank her for revealing my resilience. The narcissism of reframing systematic abuse as some kind of gift would be laughable if it wasn't so twisted. I didn't respond, but I did share it with my therapy group as an example of how abusers often try to rewrite narratives to cast themselves as misunderstood rather than accountable. The cousin who passed along the message got an earful from Sarah, who's become fiercely protective of our family's peace. I didn't ask her to intervene, but when she heard about Emma's attempt at contact, she called every extended family member to make it clear that anyone who facilitated communication between Emma and us would be cut off as well. Some might see this as harsh, but Sarah understands what's at stake. She lost her son to a war, but she almost lost her relationship with his daughter to Emma's lies. She won't risk our hard-won peace for anyone's comfort. I'm working on a book now, expanding this story into something that might help others recognize the signs of systematic sabotage earlier than I did. The research has been eye-opening, connecting me with psychologists who study what they call intimate terrorism, the deliberate destruction of another person's life by someone close to them. Patricia Huang, who's been consulting on the book, says Emma's pattern fits several personality disorders, though diagnosis from afar is impossible. What matters more than labels is recognizing the behavior patterns, the manufactured chaos, the strategic lies, the careful cultivation of others' doubt about the victim's credibility. Lucas, now 12 and thriving in middle school, asked me recently if I thought his mum was evil. It was one of those questions that stops you cold, demanding honesty while protecting a child's heart. I told him I believed his mum was very sick in her mind and heart, that she'd made terrible choices that hurt people, but that didn't mean he was destined to be like her. We talked about how he gets to choose who he wants to be every single day, that genetics isn't destiny. He seemed relieved, admitting he worried sometimes that he'd inherited whatever made his mum hurt people. Tom later told me that conversation had lifted a weight from Lucas that therapy hadn't been able to budge. The financial impact of Emma's sabotage continues revealing itself. As I've gotten my credit reports cleaned up and worked with forensic accountants, we've discovered the full extent of her identity theft. Beyond the house and the money from our parents, she'd opened credit cards in my name, taken out loans, even filed tax returns claiming income I never earned. The IRS investigation alone took 18 months to resolve. Each discovery feels like finding another landmine in what I thought was cleared ground, but I've gotten good at paperwork, at documentation, at proving who I am versus who she pretended I was. This morning, Danielle asked me to tell her the story of the butterflies again, the one about how caterpillars have to completely dissolve inside their cocoons before they can become butterflies. She loves this story, though I'm not sure she fully understands why I cry every time I tell it. How do you explain to a 4-year-old that sometimes we have to let everything we thought we would dissolve before we can become who we're meant to be? That destruction and creation are often the same process, just viewed from different angles. Marcus proposed last month in the most perfect, understated way. No grand gestures or public declarations, just the 5 of us having a picnic in the park where we first met at that support group. The boys were in on it, had helped him plan everything down to Danielle's butterfly colouring book that had the ring hidden in a special page. When I said yes, all 3 kids cheered and piled on us in a group hug that knocked us over into the grass. Later, Ryan whispered to me that his mom would have liked me, would have been happy his dad found someone who understood. These children are so wise, so generous with their love despite their losses. Planning a wedding while navigating the complexities of our family situation requires careful consideration. We've decided on a small ceremony in Sarah's backyard, with Jake officiating since he got ordained online, specifically for this purpose. The guest list is intentionally limited to those who've proven themselves through the fire of the last few years. No obligation invites, no extended family who still think Emma was just going through something. Only the people who stood by us, who chose truth over comfortable lies, who helped build this new life from the ashes of the old. Danielle will be our flower girl, of course, and the boys will be Marcus's best men. Sarah will walk me down the aisle, taking the place of a father who's too complicated to fill that role right now. My parents will attend, sitting in the second row, present, but not presiding. It's taken a lot of therapy to get to a place where I can include them at all. But I want Danielle to have grandparents, want to model forgiveness even when trust has to be rebuilt grain by grain. They've proven themselves these last few years, shown up consistently, respected boundaries even when it hurt. People can change, can learn, can do better. Just not Emma. Never Emma. The dress shopping trip with Sarah was unexpectedly healing. My first wedding dress, the one Emma had somehow sabotaged, had been my grandmother's, carefully preserved for decades, only to arrive destroyed days before the wedding. This time, Sarah and I went to a small boutique where the owner, hearing a piece of our story, brought out dress after dress until we found the perfect one. Simple, elegant, nothing like what I'd worn to marry Daniel, but perfect for who I am now. Sarah cried when I came out of the dressing room, saying I looked like hope personified. We bought it on the spot. No alterations needed, like it had been waiting for me. I think about forgiveness often, what it means and doesn't mean. People assume that processing trauma means you have to forgive to move forward, but I've learned that's not always true or necessary. I've forgiven my parents for their blindness, forgiven myself for not seeing through Emma's mask sooner, forgiven the universe for the cruel timing of Daniel's death. But Emma, that's a different category entirely. You don't forgive cancer for trying to kill you. You cut it out and monitor for recurrence. Emma is a cancer I've excised from my life, and vigilance, not forgiveness, keeps her from metastasizing back into our world. The children are my greatest teachers in resilience. Danielle, who will never know a father's embrace, but speaks to Daniel's photo with such casual confidence that she clearly feels his love. The boys, who've navigated the complexities of gaining a bonus mom and sister with grace beyond their years. Lucas, who chose love over blood, safety over familiarity, truth over comfortable lies. They show me every day that broken things can heal stronger, that families can be built from choice as much as chance, that love multiplies when given freely, rather than hoarded or weaponized. Sometimes I write letters to Daniel that I'll never send, updating him on our daughter's latest adventures. How she insists on wearing butterfly wings to grocery stores. How she's inherited his stubborn streak and my tendency to organize everything. How she asks deep philosophical questions at bedtime that leave me scrambling for age-appropriate answers. In these letters, I tell him about Marcus too. How he honors Daniel's memory while loving us fully. How he's teaching Danielle to throw a baseball because that's something her daddy would have done. I think Daniel would like him, would be grateful that his girls are protected and cherished. The ripples of that night continue expanding outward. Tom met Rebecca at a support group for single parents that I'd recommended, creating another connection born from chaos. My parents joined their own therapy group for parents estranged from adult children, working to understand how their enabling created the perfect environment for Emma's pathology. Even Jake found love with a fellow veteran he met at one of Daniel's memorial services. Someone who understood the weight of survivor's guilt and the complexity of loving those who didn't come home. I measure time differently now, not just in years since Daniel's death or since Emma's confession, but in moments of genuine joy that she couldn't steal. Danielle's first laugh. The day Lucas called me his real aunt. Sarah teaching me her mother's secret recipe for chocolate cake. Marcus singing off-key in the shower just like Daniel used to. The boys, including Danielle in their elaborate Lego constructions. These moments accumulate like pearls on a string, creating something beautiful from irritation and time. The story I'm writing for others who've experienced intimate betrayal has taken on a life of its own. What started as a simple memoir has evolved into a resource guide, complete with warning signs to watch for, strategies for protecting yourself while processing the truth, and frameworks for rebuilding after destruction. The publisher wants to market it as a true crime story, but I insist it's more than that. It's a survival guide, a love letter to chosen family, a testament to the fact that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you clears the path for the best things to find you. As I finish writing this expanded version of our story, Danielle has just started kindergarten. She marched into her classroom wearing her butterfly backpack and Daniel's dog tags tucked under her shirt for courage. Marcus and I stood in the parking lot afterward with the boys, all of us a little teary at this milestone. Life moves forward whether we're ready or not, carrying us away from our ghosts and toward futures we couldn't have imagined in our darkest moments. The boys will start high school next year. Lucas is talking about college. And sometimes I look at our blended, beautiful, chaotic family and can barely breathe from gratitude. The sun is rising now as I close this chapter, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that remind me of the butterfly theme from Danielle's first birthday. Transformation and new beginnings. From one twin who chose darkness to another who chose light. From a marriage built on truth to a sister's relationship built on lies. From a soldier who died believing he was unloved to a daughter who will never doubt she is cherished. These are the contrasts that define my story, the shadows that make the light shine brighter. And in the end, the light always wins.